All right, my computer says 10 o'clock. What about everyone else? Yes, good. Okay, then it being 10 o'clock, I will call to order our regular council meeting for Tuesday, May 12th at 10 a.m. and recognize that we are conducting our business today in Tla-o-qui-aht territory, and not just express that, but acknowledge it and say thank you and express our gratitude for that. I want to just note for everybody that's watching us and participating today that our meeting is being video recorded, and we will be posting it on the district's YouTube channel. And as well, just before we get going, we are trying something new today with public comment and question period. So most people remember that we usually have a 2-minute period that a person can sign up to speak in a slot at the beginning of the meeting, and then at the end of the meeting you are also able to ask a question of any matter that was on the agenda. So we are going to attempt to recreate that digitally, and we're going to do it with the Q&A function on your screen. So if you take a look at the bottom of your screen, there's the Q&A function, and what you can do, and if you were wanting to make a 2-minute comment today, for example, you can go in there and just type the agenda item that you wanted to speak to, and then when we get to that point, our staff can control the muting and unmuting, and I will call on you as the chair of the meeting, and then you can make your 2-minute statement. It's the same at the end of the meeting. So at the end of the meeting, as we approach the end of the meeting, if you have a question about an item that was on the agenda, again, you can use the Q&A window on your device, and you don't need to type your question in there. Please don't type your question in. We want to hear it read out loud. So we won't be able to see your video, but we will be able to hear your voice. So for anybody who wants to give that a try, we are willing to give it a try too. And just a reminder that it is difficult to do so on this digital platform, but just like we would be in a regular council meeting, this is council's meeting that we are welcoming you to be part of and to watch us, and we ask that there not be disruptions. And we do have the ability to kick people off, but we don't want to do that. So looking forward to a smooth council meeting. So we'll switch now to our agenda, and I will ask first, please, for a motion to adopt the agenda.
Move adoption.
So moved.
Councillor Chalmers and seconded by Councillor Law. All in favor? We can see each other, so we use our hands. Thank you. That is carried. And then we have 3 sets of minutes to approve today, to adopt. And the first is the minutes of the regular council meeting that was held on April 28th.
Move adoption.
Second.
Thank you. Moved and seconded. Were there any errors or omissions in the minutes? Okay, seeing none, all in favor? Thank you. That's everyone. Motion carried. And the second are the minutes from the special council meeting that was held April 24th.
Move adoption.
Second.
Thank you. Moved and seconded. Any errors or omissions from those minutes? Seeing none, all in favor? Thank you. Motion carried. And then last but not least, the minutes from the special council meeting that we held on April 30th.
Move adoption.
Second.
Thank you. Moved and seconded. Any errors or omissions in those minutes? Okay, seeing none, all in favor? Thank you. Any opposed? None. Motion carried. All right, so public comment, I don't think we have any, so that's okay. It's short news for those folks, short notice to try. So we will move on to our delegations, and we have a delegation today from the Ahousaht First Nation, and with Eric Delvin from the Nature Conservancy and Tyson Atleo from Ahousaht. And so, gentlemen, you have 10 minutes to do your screen sharing and make your presentation, and then we have the opportunity afterwards for some dialogue and questions. So I will hand it over to you.
Very good, thank you. And Tyson, is your video working?
Oh, I'm here. I'm always here.
Oh, very good. There you are.
Okay.
So it's really good to be here today. So my name is Eric Delvin, and I'm from Washington State and have worked for the Nature Conservancy for the past 17 years. And it's really nice to be here virtually with my colleague Tyson Atleo, who's also an Ahousaht First Nation member. Today I'm going to start with a quick overview of who the Nature Conservancy and Nature United are, what our priorities are as an organization and our engagement in Clayoquot Sound to date, and also our commitment to the region, and then end with my hope for how we can be engaged with the District of Tofino. And then I'll turn it over to Tyson, who will introduce himself and MHSS and the work that MHSS is doing, including economic development in the region. So the Nature Conservancy is not the same organization as Nature Conservancy of Canada, which you may be familiar with, distinct organization. I work for the global organization, which works around the world in 79 countries, and our Canadian affiliate is called Nature United. And the priorities of Nature United in the strategic priorities of Nature United in Canada include Indigenous-led conservation, and really we focus on increased authority of Indigenous peoples to steward their lands and waters, which results in which we believe really results in effective and durable conservation solutions for people and nature. And then we believe that Canada has a huge role to play globally in terms of climate action, and so we support advancing natural climate solutions. So just to give you an overview of the work that the Nature Conservancy and Nature United have been supporting in Clayoquot Sound, we really came to Clayoquot Sound at the invitation of the hereditary chiefs from 2 First Nations back in 2008, shortly after the Nature Conservancy helped to raise $39 million as part of the Great Bear Rainforest Agreement that ultimately raised a $120 million fund for the Central Coast Nations, 27 Central Coast Nations. At that time, we were invited to do a similar thing, a conservation financing project here in Clayoquot Sound. And it took us a while to build relationships. Significantly, in 2012, we extended a $1.15 million loan to Ahousaht, a forest company that owns the tree farm licenses over the majority of Clayoquot Sound. And the purpose of that loan was really to have some space for a conversation about a conservation financing project. And we really spent the time up to now supporting and working with the First Nations to develop their visions for the future of their lands and waters. And so I just wanted to share the commitment that the Nature Conservancy and Nature United have made to the First Nations and the commitment that we're bringing to the region. We, first of all, have committed to help with the compensation for the tree farm licenses to the company that currently owns those licenses. We've also received some funding through the Canadian federal government to help with that purchase. In addition to that, we've committed to raise up to $20 million in a stewardship endowment, a very similar model to what we did with the Great Bear Rainforest First Nations. And that's for all 3 nations, not just the Ahousaht. So we have a similar work that going on with the Acknowledgement First Nation and the Tla-o-qui-aht First Nation. And then finally, we've committed to help the nations develop a carbon offset project, which we think will generate between $10 and $22 million in the region over the period of that carbon project. And so now I'm going to turn it over to Tyson to discuss MHSS and their work.
Thanks, Eric, and good morning. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for having Eric and I join you today. This is obviously, of course, not my first visit with council, but for those of you who don't know me, my name is Tyson Atleo. My Ahousaht name is Acknowledgement. I'm the son of Tla-o-qui-aht Sean Atleo, one of the 3 principal hereditary chiefs of the Ahousaht Nation. I'm also the Economic Development Director, as Eric said, for the Emerald Edge program. I support our Canada program as well as other geographies around the world in Indigenous-led conservation and economic development. Once upon a time, I was elected and served a 4-year term on our nation's council in 2010, and during that time, I led the establishment of what you now know as MHSS, or the Moktasis Stewardship Society, and the Ahousaht Business Corporation. The society and the corporation represent the authority of our hereditary chiefs to advance stewardship and sustainable economic development interests in our territories. In our Ahousaht cultural and law, as many of you know, title and the responsibility to steward our territories is vested in the hereditary system. So the MHSS was formed following a declaration made by our chiefs claiming sovereignty over the territories, which was followed by a protocol agreement with our chief and council for working together a protocol agreement with British Columbia for economic development, and more recently, we've been exploring pathways to a reconciliation agreement with our council, BC, and Canada, and of course, most recently, COVID-19 response and recovery strategies. And so the economic development priorities of MHSS and ABC are, of course, tourism, the Ahousaht fuel station, guardians, and very recently a tribal police program, various protocols and agreements with local businesses, investments in the aquaculture sector, fisheries, forestry, entrepreneurship and labor market development, stewardship programming, and the Ahousaht land use vision, which is the highest priority for our chiefs. And I'd like to focus on that a little bit here. So following the experience of our relatives and nations in the Great Bear Rainforest, where 120 million was raised to conserve more than 9 million acres of land and support the economic growth and resilience of up to 27 communities, the Conservancy, as Eric was mentioned, was invited to our region by our hereditary chiefs to explore a very similar possibility here. Since then, the Conservancy has been supporting us in developing and now implementing those visions. After about a dozen rounds of community engagement in 2016, our chiefs announced this vision that you can see here that aims to provide greater economic, cultural, and ecological certainty for our people and for the broader region. So the principal intent of the land use vision is to convert existing private and crown timber and mineral tenures into a combination of conserved areas, which you can see as green, and more sustainably managed First Nations forestry areas, which you can see there identified as brown. Overall, the vision aims to conserve up to 82% of our territories, and this is in addition to and on top of the existing Clydewood Sound watershed plans. So we've received great support from the region thus far. For example, Gord Johns helped us to advance relationship with Environment and Climate Change Canada, where in August last year, the minister of the time, Catherine McKenna, announced her support for the work. It was really powerful to be with her in Victoria that day, where she said, this is how we need to change the world, and here's a good example of how to do it. Of course, Mayor Osborne has supported us with British Columbia engagement. The Clydewood Sound Conservation Alliance, along with local businesses, have also expressed their support. Along with our other two First Nations, of course, the three nations are going down a very similar pathway. So the vision isn't just about protection and conservation, it's about the diversification of the economic opportunities for our communities as well. As you heard from Eric, this injection of endowment funding, carbon revenues, and greater ecological certainty leads to increased outcomes of resilience across economic sectors in our region, including, of course, tourism, but also sustainable forestry. We know, as well as you all do, of course, that the success of our region is dependent on the intactness of the ecosystem. And the land use vision intends to do that. It intends to support jobs in the near term, fisheries, forestry, stewardship, and of course, longer term economic diversification. We've done our own economic analysis of the region over several years and see the land use visions as real cornerstones of a longer term, more sustainable economy, especially for our communities, of course. And what we're looking to establish today is a closer working relationship with the district on the development of the Regional Economic Recovery Plan. And of course, your support for advancing this work with British Columbia and the licensee, Mammoth Natural Resources. I've done a lot of engagement with British Columbia over the last 4 years or so, and know that right now a joint effort or statement from us collectively in the region would be very powerful at this time, especially in the context of COVID-19 economic recovery and resilience in our region and beyond. And so Eric and I welcome any questions, but would really love to identify some next steps with the district.
Thank you very much, Tyson and Eric. Let me open it up for questions and comments from members of council.
Don't all jump at once.
Anybody have any initial thoughts or feelings? Yeah, Councillor Anderson.
Yeah, it's really exciting to hear your announcement, Tyson, and the work that you've been doing. I didn't know which question you'd be asking today, so I think Mayor Osborne could maybe fill you in a little bit more. If you haven't heard, we have a mayor's task force on recovery that's working on a couple of fronts to move forward out of the COVID-19 pandemic crisis. So I think if you haven't already heard from the mayor, maybe you could get in touch. And I think at this point, that would be the touch point for working on the regional economic recovery plan that you're talking about. So that's all I have.
Thanks, Councillor Anderson. Yes, the two task forces that we've set up are focused on some more immediate and short-term recovery, really getting people back up on their feet again with respect to getting businesses reestablished and also dealing with people on the more psychosocial and support they need there. But there is a bigger discussion to be had around better regional cooperation and more regional discussion around what our future looks like. And I think that I've been aware of the work that's been going on for quite some time. And I know Tyson and Eric, you already know that I'm very excited to see this kind of self-expression and self-determination and the possibility that we as a municipal government would be able to engage directly with your nation and with the chiefs to be able to figure out how better we can work together and how we can support each other. And so it leads us down a path that I think provides a lot more certainty, and it provides us more structure and framework to have this dialogue and these discussions. So I don't know the exact thing that I'll suggest right now for how we would take this forward. I think we do need to delve into it more than just what a 10-minute conversation in a council meeting can be done. And I think that might be a logical next place to go as well. And I appreciate too what you were saying about working with the other two nations in Clayoquot Sound and Ahousaht and Tla-o-qui-aht. I think there's a lot of movement in both of those nations too now around some of these kinds of opportunities and engagement, like to really directly see people being engaged in the way that we conduct our lives, right? And it's more than just the economy and more than just about making money, but that's clearly a really important part of what's going on. I'll stop there, Tyson, so you can reflect back.
Sure. Yeah. No major reflections. This was an opportunity for us to get back on your radar. Obviously, having read the article in the Westerly, for example, and know a little bit about the process that's going on, it's an unprecedented time for us to collaborate together and kind of jointly support a vision for a future that is inclusive of obviously the offshore communities as well as the Tofino community, one that kind of benefits everyone, obviously. And I know, Mayor, you understand that and you understand the work. This is just this is the right time to collaborate on messaging and on exploring some of those possibilities. I'm hearing that very strongly from British Columbia. There is no playbook for how you go and make what we're proposing a reality. And so working together and collaborating kind of where there might be difference and finding a mutual pathway is absolutely the future for this kind of work, and possibly the future of a region like this, right? We can set quite the precedent.
Thank you. Other questions or comments from council? One question I have maybe is, what can we as a municipal council do to support you in your relationship building with the Crown, with the province of British Columbia, and with the federal government? What kind of role could you see us playing there?
Yeah, I think there's a very short-term, easy win there, and that is an articulation on behalf of the district of support for kind of this effort moving forward. Some sort of verbal commitment by way of letter or in writing that says, this aligns with, or this is a part of our strategy moving forward in the future. Something articulated as such, which we could work on together, of course, would be very powerful right now.
Thank you. And then maybe one last question or just piece of information is that we are pleased to be able to meet with the elected Chief and Council of Ahousaht next week. And so if you have any guidance you want us to take forward to that meeting, then we can chat offline and about that or any suggestions. I know that you have a good working relationship with the elected Chief and Council there, and that's a really important part of this work too.
Absolutely, it's a critical part of this work, and it's a critical part of Ahousaht as a broader governance. It's fantastic to hear that you're meeting with them next week. Of course, Ahousaht's needs and interests are diverse and complex, and so working together to find the right pathways forward is what we need to be doing right now. And then unfortunately, of course, we can't be meeting in person, which is how Ahousaht prefers to conduct its governance. But I'll let you know that I was on the first virtual meeting of the hereditary chiefs ever just last week, and we conducted our protocols as well. And we will be getting, and we've been working really, really closely with Chief and Council on COVID-19 response. And so these are our kind of food safety programs, or food security programs, community safety programs, et cetera, which has really brought the two kind of branches of our government together very closely right now. And now we're looking forward to moving into recovery strategies as well. So that's our next step. And if we can align our recovery strategies with the district's interest in recovery strategies as well, then we're really all working in the right way, in my opinion.
Great. I totally agree. Thank you. Eric, any last comments from you? And nope.
Just that I appreciate the opportunity to be here. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. And I do think it's, you know, what we've seen where nations have these kind of endowments set up is greater sustainability of funding sources in times like this. And I think there's an opportunity with moving forward with this, what the nations want to do in terms of these land use visions, to be part of a more equitable recovery in the region, and that's more sustainable for the long term. And so we really welcome the opportunity to collaborate, we, the Nature Conservancy and Nature United, to collaborate with the District of Tofino on this work together. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Councillor Law.
I just want to say, Tyson and Eric, thanks a lot. This has been a long time coming. I know you guys have worked on it for many years, so congratulations on seeing it come to fruition.
Thank you.
Great.
Very
Okay.
good.
Well, thank you so much for joining us virtually today. And
Okay.
next time it will be more in person, but stay safe, and thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you all very much.
Okay, so we will move on next into the correspondence section of our meeting, and we have two letters for our to receive, and one is a letter from the City of North Vancouver, and also a letter from the District of Lake Country, both regarding the property tax deferment program and interest on deferred payments. So if anybody wanted to take any action, now would be the time to speak. Otherwise, we've just received the letters and move on. Okay, thank you. So we'll go to our first report today, which is the alternative tax collection scheme that Council has already asked staff to prepare and is coming to us today by way of a bylaw. And here is Nyla.
Thank you. Good morning, Mayor and Council. Today's report regarding the alternative tax collection scheme is in follow-up to the April 24th meeting, where staff received authorization to prepare a draft bylaw to establish an alternative tax collection scheme for 2020 property taxes. So this scheme will have a due date of July 2nd, and after the due date, the late payment penalty will be 0%, with a late payment penalty of 10% on October 1st. So this recommendation from staff comes after the province set the same tax collection scheme for all commercial properties, but this tax collection scheme excluded properties in classes 1 and classes 2, which are the other two utility or property tax classes that the municipality has assessment values in. So staff is recommending that we align the tax collection scheme with the other property tax classes. We initially had a look after the information came out from the province to see if our software, to start off with, would be able to support this differing penalty dates and due dates for different property tax classes, and we couldn't get the assurance from our software company to be able to do that in the short period of time that we had to put this in place. So then we had a look at our cash flows and our risk to cash flows as presented at the April 24th meeting and the most recent budget meeting to council. We are seeing some risk to cash flows as a result of COVID-19. We have put measures in place to reduce that risk, such as the revenue anticipation borrowing bylaw. So having a look at our risk to cash flows and the measures that we put in place, we feel confident that by putting this this tax collection scheme in place for all property tax classes, we will be okay. with cash flows. And yeah, we feel confident with this recommendation. So the bylaw today recommends the due date of July 2nd, 0% after that due date, and a 10% penalty after September 30th.
Thank you. I think council is very familiar with this topic by now, but are there any questions or comments? If not, then we can turn to the reading of the bylaw. And someone can make first a third reading. Councilor Law, go ahead.
All right. I recommend that the District of Tofino Alternative Tax Collection Scheme Bylaw number 1282/2020 be introduced and read a first, second, and third time.
Second.
So moved and seconded. Any questions on the bylaw itself? All right, all in favor? Thank you, that's everyone. Motion is carried. And adoption.
Okay, I'll move that the District of Tofino Alternative Tax Collection Scheme Bylaw number 1282/2020 be adopted.
Second.
Thank you, moved and seconded. Any final comments? All right, all in favor? Thank you, that's everyone. And so the motion is carried. And just as a reminder for those people who are watching the meeting today, under the current state of affairs with the pandemic and the way that council meetings are being conducted, municipal councils have been granted the right for a temporary time to be able to introduce and adopt a bylaw all in one meeting. So typically that would not happen, but these are unusual times. So moving on in that same vein, we are now going to consider the financial plan bylaw for 2020 to 2024 and the 2020 tax rates bylaw. And this, of course, comes after literally hours of discussion by council and management and hours and hours and hours and hours of work by our staff. And it is culminating today in the introduction and first, second, third reading and consideration of adoption for both of these bylaws. Nyla, did you have any comments you'd like to make?
I do, thank you. So I don't have a formal presentation today. The financial plan was prepared based on the information presented at the most recent budget meeting of council on April 30th. And that information is available on the district's website in far more detail than I will present today. There's only one difference from what was presented at the April 30th meeting. In balancing the financial plan bylaw, we noticed that we had noted there would be a contribution to the financial stability reserve in the amount of $150,000. That should read $50,000. There will be further amounts allocated to that financial stability reserve as we go into the next financial planning process. However, I just wanted to highlight that that has been noted to be reduced to $50,000 this year.
Thank you.
All other information does remain the same as of the April 30th budget meeting. And I just wanted to highlight a few points before council considers the bylaws. So the 2020 taxation has been reduced 19% over 2019 taxation. This was made possible by reducing the capital infrastructure levy and deferring or removing many non-essential projects and expenditures that were funded by taxation. We were required to reduce staffing levels as a result of service level reductions, and we have suspended the hiring of temporary positions in 2020. We have also delayed the hiring of some essential service positions that are required to continue to provide essential services to late in 2020 and into 2021. Taxation has been reduced in all years of the financial plan. The removal of the indoor recreation facility planned $183,000 in debt servicing that would come from taxation. That has now been removed from the financial plan. The capital and infrastructure levy has also been reduced in the first 5 years of the financial plan. $0 will come from taxation in 2020 with a small contribution from general surplus funds. And the levy has been reduced by 50% in 2021 with a contribution from general surplus and taxation, and 25% reduction in 2022 and 2023. We hope to reach the optimal level of investment by year 2024. However, we will be thoroughly reviewing this plan for C&I levy and the next financial planning process that will begin in a couple months. Utility rates will be frozen for 2020, and this was made possible by applying prior year's operating surpluses to the current budget and transferring financial stability reserve funds. Those funds are set aside for circumstances just like these, where we are seeing a risk to our revenues and we need to stabilize those revenues to reduce the impact to the user. There is a planned increase in 2021. However, we will revisit those planned increases in the next financial planning process. We are committed to revisiting service levels and taxation levels throughout each financial planning process as information regarding the economy and service delivery demands becomes available. We have prepared this plan with the best information that we have available at this time. However, we know that the financial impact of COVID-19 will extend beyond 2020. As we continue to develop financial plans and tax policy, we must ensure that those plans and policies allow the municipality to effectively provide essential services, generate and ensure stable future revenues, and support a resilient, efficient, and reliable municipality. These needs need to be balanced with developing plans and policies that consider the fiscal health of taxpayers and the community at large and respond to the current economic climate. Like many other things, financial planning for municipalities has taken on a new normal and will be done so under a new lens going forward. More than ever before, it will be important to maintain transparency and consult our taxpayers on a more regular basis as we move forward. So this has been a lengthy financial planning process, one like no other, and I am truly honored to be the financial officer for the municipality during this difficult time, to provide financial leadership and hope for success as we come out of this difficult time. So I just wanted to take a moment to thank the management team, thank CAO, financial services staff, and mayor and council for their support over the past 2 months in particular, as we redevelop the financial plan under a new set of objectives and priorities. And I also wanted to thank the community for their patience and understanding as we navigated through this extraordinary time. So today's recommendations introduce the 2020 to 2024 financial plan and 2020 annual tax rates bylaw for council's consideration. I'm happy to answer any questions council may have regarding the plan and bylaws that you have before you.
Thank you very much, Nyla. Always a momentous moment, but this year, never more than ever. Are there any questions from members of council? I think not, because you and your staff have done such a tremendous job of answering our questions all along. And I just really want to applaud you and thank you for all of the work that you've done. All of the thanks you just gave, I would echo, but especially you, Nyla, for your leadership in this time. So I would turn council's attention then to the bylaw readings.
I'll move that the District of Tofino 2020-2024 financial plan bylaw number 1283-2020 be introduced and read a first, second, and third time.
Second.
Thank you. Moved and seconded. Any questions or comment? All right, all in favor? Thank you. That's everyone. Motion carried. And adoption.
I'll move that the District of Tofino 2020-2024 financial plan bylaw number 1283-2020 be adopted.
Second.
Thank you. Moved and seconded. Any final questions? All in favor? Thank you. Motion is carried. And the tax rates bylaw.
I'll read that one. I recommend that the District of Tofino 2020 annual tax rates bylaw number 1284-2020 be introduced and read a first, second, and third time.
Second.
Thank you. Moved and seconded. Any questions? All right. All in favor? Thank you. That's everyone. Motion carried. And adoption.
I'll move that the District of Tofino 2020 annual tax rates bylaw number 1284-2020 be adopted.
Seconded.
Thank you. Moved and seconded. Any final questions? Comment? All in favor? Thank you. Motion is carried and it's done. All right. Thank you, Nyla. That's a
Thank you.
tremendous amount of work. And now you already get to turn your mind to next year, I know, because that's the way it works in your department. Thank you, everyone. And thank you especially too. I just want to echo what Nyla said around the patience that the community has shown over the last 2 months while we go through this and entirely revisit the planning process and every department and the expenses and changes that have been made. I think that we can be really proud of the work that's been accomplished here and that we're presenting something to the community that we feel strong and confident about in reflecting what's going on during these difficult times, and that we are, as always, willing and able to work with the community moving forward and ably served by some incredible staff. So thank you, everybody. Okay, so now we'll change the subject and go to some planning reports. And the first is a permission to proceed application for the Tofino Resort Marina waterfront lease. And I think Peter is presenting to us today. Thank you, Peter.
Good morning, Mayor and Council. I'm just going to attempt to share my screen here. All right, so hopefully everybody's looking at the opening slide for a presentation regarding the Tofino Resort Marina. This is a permission to proceed presentation related to the foreshore lease at 634 Campbell Street. So that's the marina area that's currently in front of the Tofino Resort and Marina. A little bit of background on the application. It was received July 19th of 2018. This service has been operational historically and currently under the current management for this foreshore area. The applicants originally understood that it was permitted under the zoning. However, a couple of years ago, there was a significant redevelopment of the property and of the marina. A lot of the configuration was changed of the docks. And the location that was chosen for the pickup and drop-off point for float planes actually extends just out of the W1 zone and into the MC1 zone, where we've received legal advice that this particular use is not currently officially sanctioned under the zoning bylaw. So the location of the overall foreshore lease is in red on the left. The area of the foreshore lease that we're considering for rezoning is on the right in blue there. So the proposal is essentially to change that small square in blue from the Marine Community Zone, Marine Community District, to the Commercial Waterfront District. This amendment would permit the applicant to allow commercial float plane drop off and pickup in that one particular area of the foreshore lease that is currently not permitted. So here's a quick look at the proposal. This was included in the staff report, but it just illustrates currently the area of the W1 zoning, as well as the area of the MC1 zone, and the current configuration of the docks. You can see that the area where the float plane comes in is proposed to essentially be just sticking into the MC1 area. So taking a quick look at some of the policy we use as staff to help guide our recommendations, there's some broad support in the vision to action for a working waterfront, as well as kind of a consideration for transportation and infrastructure, and kind of making Tofino the transportation hub for the general area that we find ourselves in. The official community plan doesn't specify this as a particular land use designation, as it is outside of the area of the OCP. However, as it is generally within the District of Tofino, the overall land use vision in the OCP does support a working harbor. Again, environmental considerations are a cornerstone of all development here in Tofino. So there are some policies that are worth considering, even though the foreshore does not have an official land use designation in our OCP. Zoning, so most of the lease is currently zoned W1. That small corner that we saw is zoned MC1. Historically, this lease has been used as a marina for many, many years, but during the redevelopment of, I believe, 2016, 2017, the docks were reconfigured. The license of occupation was consolidated into a full foreshore lease, so the area is actually considered an entire foreshore lease. And the one area of the dock that was renovated, unfortunately, sticks just out of the U1 zone, and so that's kind of what's driving this zoning amendment. A couple of the land use considerations that staff have flagged at this point. Looking at the use of the area, staff are generally in support. Historically, there has been float plane service coming in and out of here. It's a bit of a tricky area to get a float plane in and out of. There's some significant current that can pop up in that particular area of the harbor. as well as some wind on top of that can make it very difficult to get a boat in, let alone a float plane. However, the renovations and the adjustments to the docks a few years ago have actually increased the safety of that service, and staff are generally in support of allowing that service to continue operating in this new area where hopefully things will be a little bit more safe and result in a higher level of service overall for the float plane operation. Parking, although this is basically a service that's primarily going to be used by people from out of town coming to Tofino, staff anticipate that it may also be used by residents of Tofino looking to make their way to Vancouver. So we intend to work with the applicant to ensure that any parking concerns are fully addressed. If residents who are traveling to Vancouver need to leave their cars on the property, that will be fine. There is sufficient parking down in the area on the upland property. Environmental considerations. At this point, the dock has already been constructed, as we've discussed. However, whenever we look at these kinds of zoning amendments, environmental considerations are always an important point to remember. So staff will be continuing to work with the applicant to ensure that no disruption to the foreshore area or to the harbor marine area occurs as a result of the operations. Flooding and tsunami, it's on the water in the Tofino Harbor area, so it's very susceptible to flooding and tsunami. However, as there's going to be no habitable areas on these docks, and staff's understanding, it's not a major concern. The closest tsunami refuge area is up Industrial Way. However, it's almost the exact same distance to make it to the community hall. The area that we're considering, though, as mentioned, will not have any sort of habitable structures there, so it's not something that's of a major concern to staff. So the options that we're looking at, grant permission to proceed with the application, reject or refuse the application, defer or otherwise deal with the application. Staff are recommending that we proceed with considering the application. Next steps include draft bylaw coming back for first reading. Staff also wanted to flag the potential of maybe doing first and second reading consecutively, as this application has been waiting for some time. And in staff's opinion, it's a fairly straightforward application, so that may be something that council can consider when we come back for first reading if the application does proceed. And then following that, we'll move into referrals and then a public hearing as necessary. Any questions or comments? I'm happy to answer or respond. Thanks.
Thank you, Peter. Are there any questions from council? No. Great, thank you. Yeah, I agree. I think it should be relatively straightforward, and I know they have been waiting a while to get this into the docket, so to speak. So I would ask council to turn your mind to the motion at hand then.
I'll move that we proceed with the application.
Second.
You, okay, moved and seconded to proceed, I'm going to say, with further review of the zoning amendment application for the foreshore lease associated with 634 Campbell Street, just to be precise. Everyone's okay with that? Good. Okay, any questions, final comments, anything? No? All right, all in favor? Thank you. That's everyone. Motion is carried. Thank you. Thank you, Peter. Are you still up for the next one too?
I believe so, yeah.
Okay, great. So yeah, this is a file we've been dealing with for a little while, so take it away, the Gibson.
Thanks. I'll be sharing my screen again here. So this is a fairly short presentation, but I just wanted to give council a brief overview of staff's recommendations. So this is basically consideration of fourth reading for a zoning amendment at 680 Industrial Way. The original zoning amendment has been going on for the last few years. Public hearing was held on March 26th and third reading was granted at council meeting immediately following that. This zoning amendment essentially will allow for an additional dwelling unit on the industrial property at 680 Industrial Way. It was originally asked for by the applicants to be used as staff housing. Staff and council, it seems, have been very much in favor of that. However, from the get-go, staff have recommended that a housing agreement be associated with this rezoning. However, there was no report that was associated with the third reading of the bylaw that occurred right after the public hearing. So typically during third reading, staff will ask council to confirm that there are certain conditions that must be met in order for final reading to be granted. However, that did not happen due to the nature of that particular reading. So there's been some discussion essentially since then between staff and the applicants. The applicant is of the opinion that the housing agreement is not necessary, and they don't feel that council have requested one, so they've asked that staff essentially brings back for council's consideration to either adopt or to confirm that adoption does require a housing agreement. Staff are of the opinion that a housing agreement should be required prior to adoption. I'd just like to outline a couple of the reasons why we feel that way. So the original proposal was to allow for additional dwelling space to be used as staff accommodation on the property. There were no additional permissions that were requested, so a fairly easy to support zoning amendment application. However, staff, my predecessor, Dana, as well as Manager of Community Sustainability, in their reports to council both recommended that a housing agreement be secured prior to final reading of this zoning bylaw. Historically, housing units have been lost within the District of Tofino when they're not protected by these kinds of agreements. And since over the last 5 years or so, they've become fairly common. Council, I'm sure, is quite familiar with the myriad ways we've used them. But one of, a similar housing agreement or a similar rezoning application did require a housing agreement just across the street at the Tofino Brewing Company. So there has been a certain kind of understanding that these sorts of things are associated with rezonings, even though staff and council are typically very supportive of them. Our concern primarily is that if not secured, the additional housing unit that was granted through this rezoning could be converted to an office use or any other use that's permitted on the property, either by the current or more likely future property owners. So based on the concerns mentioned, and also just taking into account policies explicitly stated in the OCP Vision to Action, as well as council strategic priorities, staff feel that a housing agreement does line up with kind of the intent of what it is that we're looking to do within the district, and recommend that it be made a requirement of final reading. However, I do want to acknowledge that this may not have been made clear to the applicants at third reading in a very explicit way. And the applicants have gone on to indicate that the units will be used explicitly for staff accommodation. They have no interest in attempting to do any sort of short-term rentals with them or to turn them into an office space or anything like that. They've been constructed to serve that purpose, and so I feel like it is worth mentioning that from their perspective. So the options that staff have moving forward are to specify that the adoption of the zoning amendment is subject to a finalized housing agreement and the associated bylaw that allows the district to enter into these housing agreements. Or the zoning amendment bylaw could be adopted without the housing agreement, or we could defer or otherwise deal with the application at this point. Staff are recommending the housing agreement option. And if there's any questions or comments on this, I'm happy to speak to them.
Thank you, Pete. Does anyone have questions? Councillor Anderson.
I believe that the zoning allowed for 2 housing units, and then are we asking for a housing agreement on just one of those? Is that what's being proposed here?
Yeah, that's correct. Staff have kind of prepared a draft housing agreement that would basically secure the use of one of the units as a housing unit in perpetuity. There's no restrictions on price being charged, and typically we would just mention that anybody who rents the unit has to be employed by a business holding a District of Tofino business license. So it's deliberately a fairly open housing agreement, but the intent of the housing agreement would be to ensure that the use of the unit remains as a housing unit in perpetuity. And that's just for one of them.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Chalmers, and then Councillor Steer.
I was hoping you could clarify if they didn't use it as a housing unit, whatever they would use it for that would be allowed with this would fall under their current zoning anyway. So in my thoughts, this is kind of a bonus to the district by having this housing unit. So what would be the downfall if they reverted it to, because they couldn't do vacation rental anyway with the zoning, could they?
No, they could not. So I suppose what we typically look at is what happened at the Cedar Corners building, where there were previously 2 units of housing in there, I believe. And then when the existing restaurant moved in there, they converted those units of housing into facilities for cooking and baking, I believe. So essentially the district lost out on a couple units of housing. Because right now housing is such a concern for the district, it has become common, as I've mentioned, to use those tools of housing agreements to ensure that housing units don't go away in the same manner. So there's this particular application. It's recommended that we do have the housing agreement, though I do agree that the uses on the property are somewhat restricted to industrial uses already. So the concern is not necessarily that it'll be used for short-term rentals, but more that it may be, if for example, the current owners decide to sell it to a new property owner, if those units would then be lost to make room for either office space or potentially storage or those kinds of things. So certainly not the intent of the units as they are currently constructed, but potentially a possibility in the future that staff are aware of.
And follow-up, those are items that they could do anyway. Currently, office space, like if they built office, they don't need to change zoning for that.
Yeah. Currently, that's my understanding.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Steer?
Thank you, Peter. I will be recommending that we adopt the bylaws stands. And I do support the housing agreements in principle, and I understand their value in protecting the limited supply of housing we have in our community. But I think the applicant has gone through a due process here. And typically my understanding is that these concerns around a housing agreement would have come up quite a bit sooner. And so at such a later date, that I do feel the applicant has a strong reason for not wanting to follow through with the agreement at this later date. I also feel that they've been addressing on their own a housing issue that we have. They're providing staff housing, and I have to be honest, it's beyond my imagination what other use those could be, and I'll admit my imagination is not that great. So I will be recommending that we adopt as follows, with caveat that I do appreciate and understand clearly the reasons for having housing agreements in the first place. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Steer. Anyone else? Councillor Law?
Yeah, Peter, could you elaborate on the applicant's resistance to a housing agreement?
Certainly, I think my understanding from my conversations with them, to be clear, this was a file that Mr. Rogers was dealing with. Since he's become quite occupied with the district's COVID response, I've tried to move some of the files that he was working on along. So he has had more conversations with them, but my understanding from my email conversations, my email correspondence has been primarily that the applicants don't feel that it's necessary for them in that what they were asking for in this zoning amendment bylaw was purely to be able to construct a little bit of additional housing for staff housing, and they have no intention of using it for any other purpose. And they further have, had conversations with former councillor Dorothy Barrett, where she was kind of unsure of whether or not a housing agreement would be necessary. And so these are based on conversations that they've had, quite a while ago now. And when they came back to look for fourth reading, we had no specific recommendation at third reading that a housing agreement be adopted. And so they were also hesitant to encumber their property with another legal agreement when they didn't feel that it had been specifically asked for by council, and they also did not feel that it was necessary based on their original intention of constructing the housing, which was to provide housing for their employees. Staff's, I guess, concern is mostly stemming from district policy, which is to, look to secure and ensure that we have housing in the future and in perpetuity. And so at this point, with the current owners, I don't believe that they have any intention of changing the use of the units to anything other than housing. However, based on district policies, it would be nice to ensure that at least one of them is used as a housing unit in perpetuity, and that's where staff recommendation comes from.
Thank you, Aaron.
I can provide a little bit of background if council wishes.
Sure, that would be great. Thank you.
Thanks. This application was brought forward in the queue based on housing, and so it was originally rezoning for as well for M3 to M2 zone, so improving the uses on that property. And as part of that, the applicants also wanted to construct a second housing unit. So they, in the original zoning, they had the rights to one unit, and they want to improve it to two. We all thought it was a great idea, and it was brought to council with the intention always of having a housing agreement, and that was communicated consistently to the applicants right through the process from the beginning of the applications all the way through the public hearing. What happened from what I recall happening is once we moved forward with the actual housing agreement, the applicants finance or their accountants looked at it with their lawyers and decided that it was going to reduce the cost, reduce the value of that property or potentially make it harder to sell. And that was the first time we had an indication that this wasn't, the applicants were no longer in favor of this. So while at public hearing and third reading, we didn't have a report, it's my understanding and that was always the intention, and very similar to how we've done all rezoning with housing for the last 3 or 4 years anyways. And if we do decide to move forward without requiring the housing agreement, then we may need to come back to council to understand what the parameters are or bring that forward on each rezoning. So it does have implications for how we deal with housing at an initial application level as well.
Thanks, Aaron. That helps.
Councillor McMaster?
Yeah, thanks, Owen. That's certainly what I recollect of the proceedings on this. So I would be in support of insisting on the housing agreement.
Thank you. Anyone else? Councillor McQuaid?
I have to say that I would concur with Councillor Steer, and while I do understand the importance of housing agreements, if there was any ambiguity on third reading, and conversations were in play before, I can understand how this would look and feel to an applicant. And I do recall the previous discussions about the reticence to having a housing agreement be in place. So yeah, I would have to concur with Councillor Steer, and I would be voting to let this go ahead as it stands.
Thank you. Aaron, can I just come back to the comment you made and maybe get you to say it again about how you view this affects kind of moving forward, how you would handle housing agreements at the very beginning of a rezoning process like this?
Sure. So currently when we receive an application and it involves housing, very early in discussion, we talk about what that actually means. And so it's not just, I would like to provide housing, great. We, as Peter or Mr. Thick had discussed earlier, we use the wolf in the fog example as a touchstone for us from a time where we didn't require housing agreements. And so if we divert from our current process or the current way of doing business in requiring housing agreements, I'm not sure at what point to bring that to council. So are we going to bring an application forward that says the applicant wants to enter into housing, wants to provide housing, but doesn't want to enter an agreement? Is that going to be one of our initial questions to council? Is that a permission to proceed? And I guess maybe, and it could be. At this point, that's not coming to council. It's understood between ourselves at planning and the applicant that this is a requirement. And until we hear different in terms of council strategic plan, then that's, yeah, I think that's probably where I'm coming from. It's not impossible. Maybe I overspoke myself there, but it will add another extra step, a little bit more of uncertainty at the beginning with an applicant as we discuss with council whether they're interested in a housing agreement for a certain property.
Okay. Thank you. Anyone else? Yeah, this goes from being easy to suddenly being actually a little bit more complex. And there's a couple of layers here. So I just wanted to present a couple of different perspectives, and I think I'm hearing both. We have a situation where an application to rezone was made, and part of that was to change from 1 unit to allow 2 units of housing, and correct, and that part of the, so one thing that would happen is that because it was increasing the amount of housing, it gets bumped up in the queue. We've prioritized applications that provide housing, and so there's a bit of an advantage in that sense of being able to move a little bit faster on that than had it just been M3 to M2. So an additional unit of housing is being proposed, and so to my way of thinking, it makes sense that that be protected through a housing agreement to prevent exactly what did happen at Cedar Corner, which was the applicant wishes to provide more housing. We want to ensure that that housing remains. The housing agreement only applies to 1 unit, so the other unit at some other time could be changed for some other use that's congruent with the zoning of the property, but that 1 unit would remain protected. Then because of matters through the process and the way it happened, it didn't follow through as easily, or there was misunderstandings or some kind of misconceptions about what was happening. And so it became a bit more complicated for the applicant, and I would say probably for our staff as well. And this is a case where for me, it's sometimes we look at the way we have policy laid out and we realize that there are always some nuances and exceptions. And the matter for me is kind of coming back to the principle. What's the principle behind it, even though there's some hardship that's created when things don't go as you had planned. I can't comment on the fact of whether a property would be devalued in terms of, or lose a little bit of value because it had the agreement on it. But it does cross my mind that we are talking about an industrial area in Tofino, and I look at the neighboring communities, and we have had conflict between housing and industrial use before. And although in this case, it would, the housing unit is owned by the same owner of the property, and so ostensibly they wouldn't put somebody in the unit that was going to have a conflict with the uses that were going on the property. It has been, in my time on council, we've kind of veered away from wanting to add a lot more housing in industrial way. But then again, coming back to this applicant, you already own the property. It's easy to do. You're building another building and you put a unit on top. So it makes sense that way. In the end, one of the things I think I always think about when these kinds of problems come forward is not just the now, but the future. And in a small town where we know people well, and we know who owns it and trust them and have a good relationship with them, and just don't know exactly what might happen in the future. And so we think forward to who might own the property. And I hear, Peter, what you're saying about where the housing agreement kind of protects the use on the property, no matter who the owner of the property is. But it's another consideration that sometimes we make with these kinds of decisions. So go ahead, Aaron.
I just like to reiterate one point. It was very clear between us and the applicant through the process, first with Dana and then myself, that this was going to happen. Because everything was going smoothly at public hearing and we didn't hear anything from the public, council decided to move forward with third reading because nothing had changed up until it changed on behalf of the applicant. So I just want to be very, very clear about this, that's the case. I would also say, my second point would be that this is something that we required from an industrial property across the road, literally across the road, and that we've dealt with two applications for a housing agreement on that property. And so I just want to, in terms of planning, it's really important to be, I think, to be consistent with our approach. And I just want to be, I won't say anything more, but to be really straightforward, this was very clearly discussed with the applicant right from the very beginning.
Thank you. Thanks for the certainty there. I appreciate that. Okay.
Can I just may I ask a few follow-up questions?
Of course, yeah.
Okay, so to the point of consistency, I agree, but I'm also reticent to run into like slippery slope arguments that this will happen every time hereafter. so I just want to pinpoint a place in the process where I perhaps don't have the most information or the most, and would like just a little bit more. If we consistently reiterate the need for a housing agreement at third reading, what happened here, like, because that is where I do see a problem coming for the applicant and for council kind of sounding like, or maybe just personally, that I don't understand why that wasn't reiterated if it was spoken to the applicant repeatedly and it was necessary. And I do have the same recollection that there was reticence from the applicant to put a housing agreement on it from the beginning. So if that was consistently stressed from the point of the applicant, and this is very important for council to have housing agreements with housing first applications, can I ask why we didn't address this at third reading, or why it wasn't there? Was it, as you just gestured to, the assumption that nothing had changed, so we were going forward with that?
Exactly. So it was very clearly articulated to the applicant through the process. This is what's going to happen. Following third reading is a time when we require applicants to fulfill the obligations that they've suggested they're going to do, such as amenities or housing. And so following the discussion with the applicant after that third reading is where this started to go off the rails a little bit. So there was nothing to trigger us to have any other discussion with council at that time, or to include another report, because from staff's perspective, nothing had changed at that point. We also, I think, and again, this is, I'll look back into my notes for this piece, but it was one of the first times that we've actually, in a while, approved council's authorized a third reading at public hearing. It's been our process for many years to go from public hearing to third reading to final reading, but as part of our approach to try to speed up our processes, and I think we as a group or council had indicated that if everything is moving forward and we aren't hearing any feedback from either the public or the applicant, that we would just eliminate a meeting basically. And so I think that's what it is. I think that's what happened here, but I'd have to double check my memory on that.
Okay, thank you for that.
Thank you. Okay, any other questions or perspectives? Does somebody want to make a motion? Councillor Anderson?
I guess one more question. You say it's been made clear to the applicant throughout the process that housing agreement would be required at some point. Is that a verbal communication, or is that something that was communicated in staff reports that we could go back and review?
I haven't been in the reports for a while, but Peter, you can confirm it. In the first and second reading, I'm 95% sure that we mentioned in the staff reports. I had subsequent meetings over the phone and in person with the applicants, and I believe at some point, and I have a little bit of correspondence around this, that they contacted Councillor Barrett about it and brought her into the conversation as well. We haven't put anything in writing since the public hearing, though.
Just a follow-up comment to that. I don't think the applicants would have sought legal advice on a housing agreement if it wasn't asked for. So that seems to me to make it pretty clear that the district had talked about it anyways. So anyways, I'm in.
Sorry, we just lost you there, Al.
Yeah, I would support the staff recommendation that's come forward at this point. So thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Law?
I think from what I've heard in the discussions here, I would concur with staff's recommendation as well.
Thank you. Okay, in that case, I'd look for a motion from Councillor McMaster. Do you want to make a motion?
I don't have a printed agenda in front of me.
Oh, all right, Councillor
The
Anderson.
motion. I'll move that consideration of adoption of zoning amendment bylaw 1250-2018 be deferred until a housing bylaw and agreement have been executed for the additional residential dwelling unit.
Second.
Thank you. So it's moved and seconded. Are there any final questions or thoughts? Okay, then I'll ask who is in favor? And any opposed? Thank you. Motion is carried. All right, thank you, everybody. All right, so moving on, we have the zoning bylaw amendment, the home occupation and wastewater treatment plant work that Aaron was doing and has presented to us before, or was it you, Peter, who presented? I'm sorry that I don't remember.
I believe it was Aaron last time.
So Aaron, did you want to make any comments on this, or? It's straightforward. Okay, did anyone have any questions from this, from the last time we discussed it? All right, then I will turn your attention to the recommendation for third reading and adoption, which can be done together.
I'll move that the District of Tofino zoning amendment bylaw 1278-2020 be read a third time, and that the District of Zoning Amendment bylaw 1278-2020 be adopted.
Thank you.
Second.
Thank you. Moved and seconded. Bob, did you have a comment?
We'd like to get those as separate resolutions, please.
Oh,
Third
okay.
reading and adoption, please.
Oh, sure. It is not written that way, but we will do it that way. So as long as nobody disagrees, we'll just consider that motion to be third reading only. Everyone okay with that? Okay, thank you. So third reading has been moved and seconded. All in favor? Thank you, motion carried. And would somebody please move adoption?
I move that the District of Tofino zoning amendment bylaw number 1278-2020 be adopted.
Second.
Thank you. Moved and seconded. Any final comment? Okay, all in favor? Thank you, everyone. Motion carried. All right. Okay, so next we're moving on to the Tofino Poet Laureate appointment. It is hard to believe that 2 years is already over, but here we are. And we have a report in front of us that if there are any questions, April is on the line and can help us with those. And otherwise, then we have a recommendation that Christine Lowther be appointed as the second Tofino Poet Laureate for the term of 2020 to 2022. And so maybe we'll do these separately as well. Did anyone have any questions about this or comments to make? All right, would somebody please make the motion?
I'll move that Christine Lowther be appointed as Tofino Poet Laureate for the 2020 to 2022 term, and that the District of Tofino Council's thanks be expressed to Joanna Streetley for her tenure as Tofino Poet Laureate for the 2018-2020 term.
Thanks.
Second.
Okay, moved and seconded. Any questions, any comments, any feedback? Okay, I'll call the question then, and all in favor? Thank you. The motion is carried. I do want to pause here though for a moment, and I don't think that Joanna is on the call today, but I hope that she will see this later. And of course, we will write to her and we will express our sincere appreciation for everything that she did in her term as the inaugural Poet Laureate for Tofino. But I just wanted to take a few minutes to reflect a little bit on what Joanna brought to us in that first term, and to say that life would be a very dull shade of gray if we didn't have the kinds of contributions that we have from the writers and the painters and the authors and the people in this area who contribute so much to the way our community is so full of culture and so vibrant. And I think that the establishment of the Tofino Poet Laureate program really is a singular accomplishment of a tiny little town like Tofino, and it's something that we should be incredibly proud of, and that we are, you know, known for a little bit across British Columbia as being a tiny little town that has a Poet Laureate program. And so to Joanna, I would say that there's no way we can ever thank her enough for what she's brought to us, and that she's written about the inauguration of council, that she organized a flash mob in front of Councillor Law's house because he had not heard the inauguration poem, and so delivered it there, that she wrote at our request about the raising of the chinolth of the totem pole at the end of 3rd Street and the markation of this territory that we live in, that she shared her poem about Dorothy Bart and the 25th anniversary of Dorothy's store at Dorothy's Celebration of Life, that she's written about storms, and she's written about weather, and she's written about people and place. And I think that she's brought a lens of looking at community life here in a way that we could never do through the reports and these now Zoom meetings and you know, town hall sessions and council meetings, and all of the way that we as municipal people who work and lead in municipal life do. And so her poetry is a form of expression, I think, that really helps us reflect a little bit differently. And I would say from myself that one of the things when Joanna came in front of council and would read her poems, that it was probably one of the only times that I ever felt like I could really sit back in my chair and you could kind of lower your eyes and just listen to the words that she was saying. And it's a very different way of taking in information. And so Joanna, thank you for your service. And none of this would have been possible without the incredible contribution of the volunteers behind the Poet Laureate program and all the organizations that have contributed financially as well. And so we thank you as well. And then for anybody who wants to read a little bit more about Joanna and the program, to go to tofinopoetlaureate.ca to learn more. And then, and now we have Christine Lowther, and how amazing and fantastic will that be? And one of the best things I think that I've read in a description about Christine is that her poems come from the edges of polite society. So I really look forward to seeing what Christine brings in her term as the Poet Laureate for Tofino, and congratulate her on her appointment. So thank you, everybody. Staying on the theme of events, arts and culture and heritage, we have another report before us from April, and she's still on the line. So did you have anything you wanted to say, April, in opening comments about the?
I think it's all pretty summed up within the report. The working group was struck to guide the implementation of the Arts, Culture and Heritage Plan, and they had an initial 18-month term. There's a number of projects still underway, and in light of recent events, we thought it was worthwhile to extend that term for another 12 months.
Thank you. Anybody have any questions? No? Okay. Would somebody read the motion, please?
I'll move that the staff be authorized to extend the term of the Events, Arts, Culture and Heritage Working Group until June 2021 to continue to implement the Arts, Culture and Heritage Action Plan.
Second.
Thank you. Moved and seconded. Any final question or comment? Okay, all in favor? Thank you. And our thanks to the members of that group for all the work that's being done. Okay, our last report today is the Tourism Tofino Board of Directors appointment. So this is an appointment that council makes each year to have a member of us sit at the Tourism Tofino Board of Directors. And I've been really happy and privileged to be able to provide this or do this for the last few years. But I know that Councillor Chalmers is ready, willing, and able to take this on, and she certainly has my full support in that. So if you're all right, I'll make the motion that Britt Chalmers be appointed to the Tourism Tofino Board of Directors for a term ending the earliest of council appointing another council member, the council member ceasing to hold office, or the Tourism Tofino Annual General Meeting in April 2021. Is there a seconder?
Second.
Thank you. Did anyone have any questions or comments?
Just say thank you, Britt.
Great. Okay, I'll call the question then. All in favor? Thank you. Motion carried. Wonderful. Okay. And then, so under our reports, we do have one committee or external report to bring forward to council, and that is from the first meeting of the Economic Recovery Task Force that Councillor McQuaid and I are both sitting on. And so our first meeting was last Wednesday, and we met for just over 2 hours. And as a first meeting, a lot of our work was focused on reviewing a draft terms of reference, discussing the principles behind recovery, understanding better how the recovery process fits in the larger provincial framework for recovery and what local government's role is, as well as confirming our partnership with Tourism Tofino and the Tofino Long Beach Chamber of Commerce. That these three organizations, the local government and those two organizations, very much working together to, especially with this focus on the economic recovery, on helping businesses get back up on their feet and helping them to reopen safely and to restore some sense of normalcy to the economy of Tofino. So we also discussed the ways that we would work together and agreed that one of the things would be really important to do, especially meeting on a weekly basis, was to get a summary of each meeting out quite quickly. And so within 24 hours, we were able to get a short summary of the meeting together and out, and that is available on the District of Tofino's COVID recovery website, so www.tofino.ca/COVID-recovery, and that will really be a website that collects a lot of the different information, including what's coming out of the two task forces. We talked a lot about how important it is to collaborate regionally, and that although this is an economic recovery task force focused on Tofino, it also means we need to communicate and collaborate with First Nations and the District of Acknowledgement, the regional district, to ensure that no one is going too fast and no one is being left behind as we work together. And then finally, we talked about the May long weekend, and we had an excellent discussion around visitor-facing messages and messages towards the Tofino business community. And so last Friday, I hope that any business owners who are watching this or who are part of watch this later will have received a letter that Mayor and Council wrote together. And thank you to Council for all your support in that. Really thanking the businesses for all of the sacrifice and contributions that have been made so far, and understanding how difficult these times are, and expressing how the District of Tofino and Tourism Tofino and the Chamber of Commerce, we are all here to help. We discussed the May long weekend and how important it is that the recovery planning process in Tofino really fit in and nest under the provincial process. And with the restart plan that was announced later that day on Wednesday, it was fitting that we were able to send out today a press release as 8 communities on the West Coast, 8 governments on the West Coast, to again reiterate the messages of the province that non-essential personal travel is to be reduced at this time, and that it is our expectation, and thanking the business owners, the accommodation owners especially, for not being open to non-essential travel at this time. There's a lot of work that's being undertaken right now by businesses and others getting ready to reopen in accordance with the province's plan, and I think there's some cautious optimism about that, and health and safety remain the most important thing to everyone. I think that's being confirmed absolutely everywhere. And yeah, I think it was an excellent meeting. Councillor McQuaid was there, and I just invite her, if you had any reflections or anything you wanted to add to that, please do.
Yeah, if you went through, I would like to flag some gratitude for the staff that is attending that meeting, and the incredible expediency at which they worked to get 2 letters and another addenda, and a lot of work done in the interim to support us. And so I just want to make sure that that's acknowledged, because that work happened quickly and collaboratively, and I'm really grateful. The business community was very well represented by the people that are sitting on that committee, and that the everything that we're working towards has a very balanced view. And I was grateful to be there to witness the thoughtful and measured discussions that came out of all of the points, reference and principles. So I'm grateful to be part of it. Thank you.
Did anyone have any questions? Okay, thank you. All right, so that brings us to the end of our business from the open meeting, and I am looking on our Q&A screen and seeing that there are no questions, which I will take to mean that there is no questions from the public. And of course, I think Andrew Bailey's on the line and he knows how to get a hold of us later if he has questions. So I would ask, please, would somebody make a motion to close the meeting? Read the in-camera motion.
I'll move that the meeting be closed to the public pursuant of Section 91AC of the Community Charter to discuss matters relating to personal information about an individual who holds or is being considered for a position as an officer, employee, or agent, and employee relations.
Okay.
Thank you. Moved and seconded. All in favor? Thank you. None opposed. That is motion carried. So we'll take a second here to set up the next part.
Can I take a 2-minute while you do that too?
Yeah, sure. You bet.